Hello, this is Jamie Peltier, Planning Supervisor with the Planning Division in the Community Development Department. The item being presented to the City Council is the citywide private parking ordinance, which authorizes private property owners to initiate and enforce parking regulations on private property. The ordinance is being brought forward on behalf of the Community Development Department. Some history and background to the ordinance. Private parking ordinances in general in California for different municipalities originated in 2015 after private property owners lobbied the state of California to allow for more private regulation of off-street parking facilities. Currently, the only regulation the state allows is towing of vehicles on private property. This regulation in the California Vehicle Code is already in place and is already permitted by private property owners. Should they have proper signage, they can tow vehicles off their private property. However, the result after lobbying the state of California was AB 451, which was passed and effective in 2016, amending a different California Vehicle Code from the towing section, which is California Vehicle Code Section 21107.8, which is a vehicle code section that regulates privately owned and maintained off-street parking facilities, generally held open for the public use of parking. Amending this vehicle code section for AB 451 means that private property owners are given the ability to issue tickets for unauthorized parked vehicles upon a city or county passing an ordinance first. An off-street parking facility for the city of Oxnard consists of a major shopping center with over 200 parking spaces, and the property owner can then authorize through the ordinance regulation of parking by a third party to then issue violations on the private property. This means that there would be a separate enforcement party not associated with the city or city police department. It would be a third party to regulate the parking facility and issue tickets. The law requires specific items such as signage, a dispute process, explicitly providing notice of charges, i.e. tickets with signage, and specifically in the law, they are not permitted to file or transmit to the Department of Motor Vehicles an invoice in an attempt to collect. The state provides the general framework, and the city can supplement with additional standards as they see fit for their community. There are several benefits to adopting this ordinance, including higher turnover of parking spaces, which then increases the parking supply and in turn can improve customer satisfaction with the shopping center. The purpose of the proposed ordinance is to provide an alternative option for parking operators to enforce parking regulations beyond towing, because currently that is the only option in place by the state. This ordinance would allow for parking owners and operators to issue parking charges, i.e. tickets, to encourage following the hours and limitations for that parking facility. An example within the city is the Collection Shopping Center, which would then be able to issue parking charges, i.e. tickets, for customers parked in meter spaces beyond the time allotted within the meter. This would happen upon adoption of this ordinance. The proposed ordinance would amend Chapter 8, the Vehicles and Traffic chapter, under Article 4 for parking, and creating a new division, the Private Parking Ordinance. The ordinance living in Chapter 8 outside of the zoning ordinance, but as I mentioned, is being brought forward by the Community Development Department and will be monitored and enforced by the Community Development Department. Within the ordinance provides a framework for private property owners with shopping retail centers containing more than 200 parking spaces to then enforce parking regulations as they establish for their parking center. An example of a regulation would be issuing notice of parking charges at meters when the time has lapsed. The various shopping centers throughout the city as a whole can choose to utilize this ordinance and elect to submit for registration with the city. Some examples of other shopping centers within the city, in addition to the collection, are the Shopping at the Rose, the Esplanade, among others, with 200 or more parking spaces. As a result of this ordinance, the shopping centers would not have an altered number of parking spaces as required of their received entitlement or per the city zoning ordinance. In order for the private property owner or operator to start utilizing the ordinance, they must submit an application to register their private parking facility with the city. The registration includes contact information for the parking operator and the property owner, the dispute resolution process, and the parking plan. The parking plan reflects the site and the areas where the enforcement would occur. Installed signage in the parking areas is part of the state law, and a minimum of 11 by 22-inch sign is required at the entries, indicating the parking regulations. The parking plan would show specific language of those signs and where they would be located on site. The site plan would highlight items like the hours for the parking, metered areas, how many parking spaces would be regulated, and where the signs would be posted. Once all the documents have been reviewed by the Community Development Department, the private parking operator receives the registration and can obtain a business tax certificate. Prior to the commencement of parking ticket issuance, the shopping center shall place temporary on-site signs 7 days in advance, notifying the customers and employees of new parking regulations and ticketing that would begin on a selected date. This is to provide notice to the public that frequent the shopping center of the new parking enforcement measures. Once the city reviews and issues registration, the parking operator can begin enforcing unauthorized parking by issuing notice of parking charges, i.e. tickets, based on the parking plan provided to the city. The notices will reflect a fee known as a mail-in parking charge. In the ordinance, the parking charges are limited to no more than the amount of stopping in a red zone, which for the city of Oxnard is $65. The amount is determined by the parking operator. The parking charges would reflect the notice in writing that the charge is not issued by the city of Oxnard, so that the customer knows that this is directly from the shopping center and not from the city. On the notice of parking charge, the customer would have the parking operator contact information to call should there be questions or a dispute claim. As a requirement of allowing the private property owner to regulate their own parking on site, a dispute policy would be submitted with the registration outlining the process that they've selected with their parking operator. A customer who received a parking charge that has the ability then to contact the parking operator, and the parking operator can dismiss or maintain the charge after a review. If the customer is dissatisfied with the review, they can request an administrative hearing for further review by a qualified parking examiner. This examiner would be hired by a third-party provider that employs certified parking examiners who are trained in parking enforcement and issuing citations. After the administrative hearing, the dispute remedies are exhausted and the decision of the parking charge is final. This dispute process is entirely within the third party, and at no point are city employees involved in the dispute process. The ordinance applies citywide, and qualifying shopping centers that elect to register are subject to remaining in compliance with the chapter. Should there be complaints or warnings can be issued that may lead to revocation by the Community Development Department director if no remedies are taken to come back into compliance. This item went to the Community Services, Public Safety, Housing and Development Committee, where it was reviewed and recommended approval to the City Council. During the meeting, the committee discussed application requirements and fees, asking staff what the hourly rate for the planner's time review is, if there is a registration that is ongoing or if it's a one-time application, and requesting to include noticing to the public that parking charges will commence by a selected date after the parking facility receives the registration. Additionally, there were questions about the current towing regulations and requirements. Staff clarified that towing of unauthorized vehicles is currently permitted for private property owners with the proper signage from the California Vehicle Code, and that California Vehicle Code will remain in place. This ordinance does not change that ability for property owners to tow, but that Vehicle Code section is now included in the ordinance to be adopted into the Oxnard City Code. The committee moved the item forward with a 3-0 vote. The recommendation moving forward to the City Council is to approve the first reading by title only and waive the further reading of the proposed ordinance titled, "An Ordinance of the City Council of the City of Oxnard adding Division 3 to Article 4 of Chapter 8 of the Oxnard City Code regarding private parking." This concludes staff presentation. Thank you so much.